The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Alan Blumkin. I'm here with my good friend David Nemec, and on another episode of David Nemec's Baseball History and Trivia. And today we're going to discuss a dynasty that never was, the 1948 through 1950 Red Sox. Welcome, David.
Welcome to you, Al, too. Pleasure once again to be with you. Happy Liberty Day, by the way.
Yeah, same to you.
Thank you. So, the 1947 season was interesting season. The Yankees, of course, came back and won the pennant, won the World Series. They were back in business. Bucky Harris won it in his first year as Yankees manager, and they were prepped to go in 1948. But two teams that showed promise. The Red Sox were 146 with a pretty good team. They won, but they lost the series. They were expected to be a possibility at least in 47, and they wanted to be sure of 48 because they had a really good team, solid team. What they felt they were missing, they felt a lack of two positions, either a third baseman or a shortstop, and I'll explain what I mean by that, because it did make a big difference, and an outfielder. The team with Ted Williams in left and Dom DiMaggio in center. In 1947, they'd had They'd had Sam Mealy, who was a rookie, and even though it was a retrospective Rookie of the Year, there was only one given that year, and that was in the National League to Jackie Robinson officially. So Mealy was unofficially, in most resources, the retro Rookie of the Year in 47. But McCarthy came in to manage the Red Sox, and he didn't think a whole lot of Mealy. And he decided if the Red Sox needed beefing up in any one position, it was definitely right field. And first base was also a question mark. In 47, the Red Sox had traded an old standby, none of the Red Sox so much as the Tigers, Rudy York, who definitely did not have too much left. And he went to the White Sox for a promising newcomer, Jake Jones, who the Red Sox thought pretty highly of. But Jones proceeded to hit, I think he hit in the 230s in 1947. And McCarthy, as a result, was souring on him even as the 48 season began. And meanwhile, in right field, the Red Sox made another crucial trade. They traded for Stan Spence, who'd had a very good year with Washington in 1947, had been consistent prior to the war and after the war. And they felt that with Spence in right field, they had a pretty good, solid team, and they didn't have to give up a whole lot for him. They gave up Leon Culberson, an outfielder who had never really panned out for the Red Sox, and a rookie named Al Kozar, a second baseman. And so they got him fairly cheaply. But they now had two positions, question marks. Right field had been filled, first base was still a question mark. But they felt they needed another big bat in the lineup. And they went after Vern Jr. Stevens, who had been the Browns' star shortstop in 44 when they won their only pennant, and it continued to have strong seasons afterwards. And they felt with a short left field and Red Sox, the Green Monster, that Stevens would really thrive. And they went after him. But meanwhile, Cleveland, which had finished fourth, a surprising fourth in 47, also decided to go after Stevens. And they were going to trade Lou Boudreau. They had offered Boudreau for Stevens. Boudreau was a player manager of Cleveland and was very popular. And Bill Veeck was then the owner, had taken over the team in 46, and really didn't care much for Boudreau's manager style, and had brought in as a coach Bill McKechnie, who'd been an extraordinary manager throughout his career. won pennants with 3 different teams. Was a really, really fine manager. And Boudreau, he supposedly was going to be Boudreau's all-around coach, handling third base and also handling things in the dugout while Boudreau was in the field. And but Beck thought that McKechnie could step into the manager's role, so he was dangling Boudreau, and the Browns really toyed with the idea, but Boudreau didn't like it, and the Cleveland fans did not like it. And the fans really staged a protest in the newspapers. And as a result, Beck backed off, and the Browns then pursued the Red Sox. The Red Sox picked up Vern Stevens, and they put him at short and put their former shortstop, Johnny Pesky, at third base. So they had Pesky at third, Stevens at short, all-star Bobby Dorr at second. They had what they thought was a solid outfield in Spence, Williams, and Tom DiMaggio. And and Bertie Tebbetts, even though he was still, it was now in his late 30s, was still a very solid catcher. Tebbetts had been done well during the war. Tebbetts was had a manager's style as a catcher, and they thought they were solid at catcher, but they got a good backup in Matt Batts, and they started. That was the lineup they started the season with. And Cleveland also had a right field problem in 47. What their long time they had been patient with Pat Siri, a really strong slugger throughout the mid-40s during the war years. But Siri struck out too much. He really fell off the table in 1947, and he wasn't going to be the everyday right fielder. So they, instead of trading with the Browns for Stevens, they picked up Walt Judnick very, very cheaply and installed Judnick in right field, and they felt they were solid in right field. Judnick had a good year for the Browns in 47. Spencer had a solid year for Washington in 48. So both teams seemed to stack up well. And then Cleveland was going to bring in Larry Doby and convert him to center field. He'd come up with a second baseman. Cleveland had Joe Gordon there. And so the Red Sox started the season with Spence in right field, Cleveland with Judnick in right field. By midsummer, it was clear that neither one of these guys was going to do the job. And it had become glaringly obvious to Joe McCarthy that Jake Jones was not going to be the answer at first base. So they brought up a guy who was a really good all-around player. He ended up being able to play regularly at 3 different positions in the majors. Billy Goodman, and he put him at first base. He also played third base later in his career very well. He also played the outfield.
Second base. He replaced Bobby Dorr at second base. Yeah, when Dorr retired after 51.
Yeah, he could play there too. He was solid everywhere, really, except probably at short, and of course at catcher. So they brought in Goodman well before midseason. Goodman took over at first base. They released Jones, and Spence, who wasn't doing the job, forced the Red Sox to start platooning him with Wally Moses and Mealy, who'd been Rookie of the Year, but McCarthy didn't really respect him very much as a player, and gave him very little.
McCarthy didn't like rookies generally.
Yeah, generally, exactly. So the Red Sox, as a result, were forced to platoon in right field, and Cleveland was forced to platoon in right field. And Cleveland also picked up a very good defensive center fielder on the cheap from the White Sox over the winter in Thurman Tucker. And Tucker played a lot of center field, sharing it with Doby, and Doby often played right field. And then the Indians picked up another right fielder from Chicago during the 48 season, Bob Kennedy, who had a great arm, was a great fielder, a suspect hitter. And Kennedy became the defensive replacement often in right field, played a lot of games in right field in which he didn't come to bat, and made a real contribution. So Cleveland probably won the right field battle because Doby, when Jusnick had a weak season, but not as weak as Spence. Spence hit in the 230s. Jusnick, I think, hit in the 250s. So this was the weakness for both teams, in right field, going as the season developed. Goodman became a very solid first baseman right away. And you can tell us what happened now after the season started, because it was an incredible season.
Yeah, well, three teams came battling down to the wire: the Red Sox, the Indians, and the Yankees. And the Yankees, I think, were eliminated, a day or two before the
they were eliminated on
season
Friday.
ended.
Yeah.
And so the Red Sox and Cleveland. The Red Sox and Cleveland wound up. Cleveland won the season series 12-11. They wound up in a flat-footed tie after the last day of the season, and the Red Sox had won the game, the toss to have the one playoff game. They had one playoff game provision, not like the three in the National League. And the Red Sox won the toss. And, getting back to McCarthy not liking rookies, the best pitcher on the staff that year, because they had lost Boo Ferris and Tex Houston the year before to basically career-ending injuries. And the best pitcher they had was Mel Parnell, who was in his rookie year. And it was 15-9, I think, was the record. And instead of starting Mel Parnell, he went to Denny Galehouse, who was 8-8.
Yeah, and the reason McCarthy gave for this was, he had a feeling that, starting a lefty against Cleveland, which had a good power hitting team, all their infielders hitting double-figure home runs. Doby hitting double figures. Even Jim Hegan, I think, was in double figures that year. So Cleveland had power, and most of the power was right-handed, excepting for Doby. And Eddie Robinson at first base hit left-handed too, but the shortstop, third baseman, second baseman, right-handed hitting coming into Fenway. McCarthy, cerebrally made the right choice in pitching a right-hander. Cleveland, on the other hand, really came down to the wire with nobody, because they had used Bearden on Saturday to clinch the tie for the pennant. He shut out the Tigers. And Sunday they pitched Bob Feller against Hal Newhouse, and all they had to do was win. And they lost, and the game wasn't even close. And they had to go into Boston, and the Cleveland team, when Boudreaux suggested pitching Bearden, the Cleveland team backed him. Bearden had already won 6 games in September, and he had 19 wins at the end of the regular season. Going into the playoff game, which counted as a regular season game, they decided to start Bearden, left-hander, in Fenway Park, and you can tell us how it worked out, Al.
Didn't Jack Kramer win 18 games for the Red Sox that year?
He did, but that's right. They picked him up too from the Browns.
Yeah,
another acquisition. Yeah,
so they started Galehouse, who was 8-8 with an ERA of over 4.
Yep.
And he got obviously Boudreaux hit a couple of home runs, and the Indians clobbered them 8-3. But the thing is with McCarthy is that there was years ago we had a book talk with some guy, author named Toffel, wrote a book on the 39 Yankees, and he said that Joe McCarthy was the greatest manager in the history of baseball. So I did a little research. McCarthy was great when you won the pennant by 10 games. Okay, did most of the time when he was managing the Yankees. The 5 seasons that he was involved in races, 3 games or less, he lost all 5 of them.
Yeah, and Cleveland managed, Boudreaux stacked the lineup with right-handed hitters. I neglected to mention the guy who also platooned in right field, a rookie that Cleveland had gotten from the Yankees, named Allie Clark.
Yeah.
And Clark had a spectacular rookie season as a part-timer. He only had around 200 at-bats. but he hit over 300. And if I'm not mistaken, I haven't looked at a box score in a number of years, but I think Cleveland decided to start, instead of Eddie Robinson, their regular first baseman, who hit lefties, I think they started Clark at first base. And so they had their lineup stacked with right-handed hitters. I think if I'm not mistaken, well, Mitchell was a left-handed hitter leading off, and Doby was a left-handed hitter, but they had 7 right. Bearden hit left-handed too, but other than that, they had a lineup of 6, guys who hit with power, batting right-handed. So strategically, Boudreau, who'd been never considered a good strategic manager, ended up outfoxing, or how much was really Boudreau and how much was McKechnie. It's impossible to determine. I'm sure McKechnie had a large input too in saying, start Gene, he's really hot. There's never been a pitcher who's won 7 games in September. There's never been one before or since. Bearden ended up with 20 wins. 7 of them came after a very late day in September. I mean, almost mid-September, really.
One of the ironic things is that the entire Indians starting infield, Boudreau, Keltner, and Gordon got very old very quickly. And they shipped Eddie Robinson after the season to Washington when they picked up Mickey Vernon in an early win. And then they sent Vernon back to Washington in 1950 for one of the worst pitchers ever, Dick Wyke.
Oh, you had to mention that.
Because and they moved Luke Easter into first base for a few years.
Yeah. They needed room for Easter. And the Vernon trade, of course, is one of the worst trades Cleveland ever made, because Vernon had a lot of years left, and they should have gotten a lot more than they did. They really had to open a spot for Easter, because Easter did have real power.
Yeah, and in 49, I was looking at how they did the Red Sox did against each team. They couldn't beat the Yankees, and they couldn't beat Cleveland. They lost the season series to both of them. And they were very good against everybody else. One of the things I forgot to mention in 1948, they were 12-10 with the A's. And the fact that they couldn't do better against the A's in 48, even though the A's were a halfway decent team that season, probably was a factor in them losing the pennant.
The A's were a contender until mid-August.
Yeah.
They were in the thick of it. And it was Connie Mack's last really good season with the team.
Yeah. In 1949, I was looking at this stuff. I knew a bit of this beforehand. The 1949 Red Sox was 61-16 at home and 35-42 on the road. I believe that's the biggest discrepancy by any team that ever won 90 games or more.
Yeah, I think I've never seen anything like that either. So
And they had everybody hit. And 48, 49, and 50 were tremendous hitting years.
One thing we should say about the 49 season, though, that the Yankees, people were beginning to talk about how the Yankees, they had some kind of control. That, the Yankees were the premier team, and that what they wanted, they got. And what happened, I know we're going to talk about these last 2 games of the season, the weekend games, the Saturday and Sunday games in New York, where the Red Sox held a 1-game lead. All they had to do was win 1 out of 2 games, and they would have won the pennant. They could have won the pennant on Saturday, clinched the pennant, and then Sunday wouldn't have made any difference. They certainly could have, they could have won on Sunday. One thing that could not happen has happened in 48. They could not end in a tie. So this race was going to be decided during the regular season without a playoff. But those 2 games were so meaningful as far as the Yankees were concerned, and as far as baseball was concerned, that for the first time in Major League history, in a regular season game, the umpiring staff on Saturday and Sunday consisted of 6 umpires. The first time in history, other than the World Series, where they've done this before, they had umpires umpiring the left field line and the right field line. And as a result of that, 6 umpires were doing the Red Sox-Yankees games, the last 2 games of the season, and only 2 umpires were I can't remember, I think it was either Washington and the White Sox or the A's and the White Sox. No, it was Washington and the White Sox, I believe. No, that doesn't make sense. But it was, it might have been the White Sox and the Browns. The last
yeah,
games
because they were in the western half.
Yeah.
But this I never knew. I know that the Yankees that year had almost everybody except for Rizzuto being on the injured list. DiMaggio missed half the season. Yogi, for the only time in his career, missed time because he got a broken thumb and missed 3 or 4 weeks. And they were threadbare, for personnel at times, and they kept pace with the Red Sox because the Red Sox stunk on the road. And the Red Sox couldn't beat Cleveland, and they couldn't beat the Yankees that year.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had a tremendous offensive team, and they had Parnell winning 25 and Kinder winning 23.
And Kinder was another acquisition from the Browns.
Yeah, from the Browns, yeah.
And
Zarilla, they brought in Al Zarilla and put him in right field.
Yeah, they did. They did make another trade. They traded for Mealy in the off season, and they started Spence in right field at the beginning of the season, and then the Browns made it known that Zarilla would become available for the right price. So they traded. I can't remember who they gave it. They didn't give the Browns anybody special, but they gave the Browns a couple of players and picked up. They picked up Zarilla to play right field.
Yeah, they sort of operated the Browns as a farm team, as a major league farm team during those years.
They did, actually, yeah.
And so in the next to last game, they started Parnell, and they had Jerry Coleman, who was a rookie, and Johnny Lindell got the key hits for the Yankees in the Saturday game. And
those are 2 guys you would not have predicted doing that.
No, because David Halberstam wrote a book called The Summer of '49 on this race, which was because when DiMaggio came back in July of 1949, the Yankees had a series in Fenway, and DiMaggio went nuts, either not having played ball for half the season basically, and the Yankees swept them. It was the first Boston Massacre. And then the Yankees won the game 5-4. And then the next game, the Yankees started Vic Raschi, and Kinder was started for the Red Sox, and Kinder went was losing 1-0 after 7 innings. They pull him for a hitter, and they bring in Mel Parnell, who gave up 4 runs in the bottom of the 7th, and Raschi had a 5-0 lead, gave up 3 runs in the top of the 9th, which supposedly he was wanting to do if the Yankees had a fairly big lead. Raschi would, and they won. The Yankees won the pennant on the last day. In fact, the Dodgers won the pennant on the last day over the Cardinals in the National League.
And then, the Dodgers and the Dodgers Cardinals game, regular umpiring staff, nothing special for the National League, 4 umpires. But
I never knew that one.
Yeah, it has never really been publicized what happened there, and nobody's ever really talked about how the Yankees were able to finagle Happy Chandler to send, because there wasn't an umpire in chief, I don't think then. Maybe Tom Conley became one. I'm not sure he was in office there as yet, but he might have been the closest to an umpire-in-chief. But how they finagled with 6 umpires in Yankee Stadium in the final 2 games. Not that the umpire made any difference, but just the fact that they had 6 umpires demonstrated that the Yankees did have, both hands in the cookie jar. And,
when I found out about the home road difference on this team, the 49 Red Sox, I just couldn't believe it. Now, if you go into that team page on Baseball Reference, they have the game by game. And it's incredible. I mean, how does it? I know that was done a couple of times with divisions, and I think the Twins one of the years that they were in the World Series with 29-52 on the road, but that team didn't come close to winning 90 games.
No, they didn't.
But how do you win 96 games in a season and split 61-35 home to road? It's just
No.
And now we and McCarthy, for the 5th time with 1930 Cubs, 1935 Yankees, 1940 Yankees, 1948 and 49 Red Sox. Those are the 5 teams he managed that lost by 3 games or less.
Yeah.
And he didn't win any of those.
Well, did I'm trying to think. Did he ever win a really close race at any time?
No.
I don't recall any.
No, as I told people, he won pennants by 8, 9, 10 games. None of these races were close.
Yeah. That hasn't been publicized much either. How how powerful the Yankees teams were, particularly in the late 30s. I've always
they were winning by 15 games in those years.
The 39 team I thought was the deepest team in Yankees history, even deeper and maybe in some respects better than the 27 Murderers Row team. But then 1950, the Red Sox.
Oh God. They had 302. They had 302. They scored 1,027 runs. And everybody, Dorr knocked in 100 and scored 100. Williams missed half the season because he busted his elbow in the All-Star game. So they put Billy Goodman in left field. And Stevens drove in 144 runs, and they brought in Walt Dropo, who had one of the greatest rookie seasons of all time. He batted .322 with 34 home runs, 144 RBIs to tie Stevens for the lead.
Yeah.
In 1951, he spent half the season in San Diego in the minors.
Yeah.
And again, the pitching was very, very. The pitching staff had an ERA of 4.88.
Wow.
Parnell was the only pitcher who pitched any amount of time for them. He was the only one that had an ERA of under 4.
Wow.
They said you look at the hitting and pitching during those years. And one thing, I was doing a project a whole bunch of years ago. In 1949, the Detroit Tigers pitching staff was the only American League pitching staff that had more strikeouts than walks, and it was 3, I think. That was the year he set the record for double plays with 217, and that was a trivia question in the first edition of the Turk and Thompson Encyclopedia. Years later, I found out that they also had 5 pitchers that walked over 100 batters.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of opportunity.
It's never been explained why the American League in 49, 50, right in the late 40s and early 50s, the American League pitchers, many pitchers had over 100 walks. The National League
they were squeezing. It was obvious that they were squeezing.
There must have been something going on in the American League to promote more hitting. Because that's all I can think of.
In 1950, Early Wynn led the American League in the ERA with 320.
Yeah. And Tommy Byrne, Tommy Byrne used to compile astronomical numbers of walks, and he wouldn't even be a qualifier some years, and he'd have over 100 walks. It was crazy.
Yeah, and what was interesting, in 1950, the first four teams, the Yankees, the Tigers, the Red Sox, and the Indians, all won over 90 games. And the four bottom teams, the White Sox, the Browns, the A's, and the Senators, were all terrible.
Yeah.
I calculate the 1950 Red Sox had scored 10 more runs in 22 games that year, including a 29-4 and a 20, I think it was a 20-2 consecutive games over the Browns. The Red Sox had a losing record against the Yankees, had a losing record against the Indians, they had a losing record against Detroit.
Yeah, that's...
Three teams that were ahead, and they all had losing records against all of them. And McCarthy either resigned or was pushed out after 59 games in 1950 because he was hitting the Blues pretty hard.
Yeah.
And they replaced him with Steve O'Neill.
Yeah. Didn't the Red Sox have Clyde Ballmer in 1952?
Yeah.
And
1950,
he was a real
50, he became a regular in 51 because he had a couple of... Yeah, he had some big home run seasons, and no indication that he was to become that kind of a slugger. And boy, they really did have. They had depth. They had offensive depth beyond belief. I mean, the pitching was awful. It killed them.
Yeah, he was a real hit, I think 325 in 19.
And then they shipped him to the White Sox after that season. Yeah. They shipped him to the White Sox, and he had 257 for the White Sox in 1951, and they put, I think in 51, they eventually made Ballmer the regular out in right field.
Yeah.
Billy Goodman was playing all over. That was Bobby Doerr's last season. That was the last, 50 was the last really great season for Stevens. Dropo hurt his wrist, went to the minors, and that was really, he had one decent year for Detroit after that huge trade in 1952. But he was really became an ordinary player for the rest of his career.
Yeah. Yeah, it never was explained what happened to Stevens. He was still fairly young. He was a drinker. But he'd been drinking his entire career, and it hadn't seemed to affect him any. Stevens. And
I know. He died early. He was 48 years old when he died.
Yeah, I know. He died very young.
And Dropo, I have a book that came out a bunch of years ago called One Spectacular Season. They go from 49 through 60. Yeah, and the 50 is Dropo, and Dropo said he got hit by a pitch and his wrist broke, and he never was able to.
When did that happen? That happened in
51, yeah. He was so bad they wound up shipping him down to the Pacific Coast League for a couple of months.
Yeah, I remember how that team fell off the table right in the early 50s. And, by 54, but they were... All
I had left was Williams and Goodman. The only one. Parnell had a great year in 53, but he got hit by a pitch toward the end of that season, and he was never really the same. After he beat the Yankees 5 times in 1953.
Yeah.
And Dom DiMaggio, because Boudreau took over as manager after in 52, and he went to a youth movement. And Dom DiMaggio still had a very good year in 1952. In 1953, Boudreau wouldn't play him. So after a couple of weeks, Dom DiMaggio said, damned if I'm going to sit on a bench for this team.
Yeah. So,
and he retired.
That youth movement went nowhere. I remember it. They had Pearsall and Tommy Umflett, and
they sent Umflett and Mickey McDermott after '53. They sent him to Washington for Jackie Jensen. That turned out to be a pretty good deal.
That did bring the team back to respectability. Yeah.
They brought in Sammy White as a catcher because in 1951 I looked at that team. The catcher who played the most games was Les Morse, who they had gotten from the Browns, and he had won 97.
Yeah.
So it took them a couple of years before they got decent again. And Williams, of course, played 6 games in 1952 and played a handful of games when he came back from Korea in 1953.
Yeah.
But this team had enough talent over those 3 years, 48, 49, and 50, to really do something, and they just couldn't cross that final line.
So why do you think they hired McCarthy, really? I mean, where do you think the responsibility lay for that? I mean, Cronin, I must have had a hand in it. I don't know.
Cronin and Yorkie, and since Yorkie was known to the source every once in a while, we figured maybe McCarthy was a compadre, and McCarthy had all those winning seasons with the Yankees. The Yankees dismissed him in 1946, probably because they got off to a very slow start, and he was probably hitting the source.
But I never understood why they had, in retrospect. At the time, I was a little kid. I was so little, I didn't really know the history of of McCarthy, or I knew that he won a lot of pennants for the Yankees in the 30s, but I didn't know anything about his drinking or anything like that, and it certainly wasn't told to me as a little kid that watch, this guy is going to be trouble as a manager. They got trouble handling. Nothing like that.
I hated young players. They lost in 1940 by 2 games, and he used Frankie Crissetti the whole year at shortstop. And Frankie Crissetti had 194. He was one of the few players to have over 500 bats and hit under 200 for a season. And Rizzuto was hitting over 300, and with Kansas City, the Yankees AAA farm team, they wouldn't bring him up.
Yeah, I never understood that.
And it probably cost them the pennant, but as I said, I think
it's fortunate that it did, because otherwise the Yankees would have won every pennant between 36 and 43.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have had an unbreakable hold on first place.
And after 1948, George Weiss took over as general manager after Ed Barrow left. And one of the first things he did was get rid of Bucky Harris and bring in Casey Stengel. And Bucky Harris has the record because he managed the 24 Senators and the 47 Yankees. That's the biggest gap any manager has ever had between managing teams that won the World Series.
I know. And the rest of his career as a manager is pretty abysmal. Except 48, he had a good season. In terms of one loss. Whether the Yankees were the best team that year or not was questionable. It came down to the final week, and there were 3 teams who were in the race almost to the final day. That 48 season. We'll never know what would have happened if the Red Sox had won that year.
Bill Veeck, wrote a lot about that season, and Veeck is on rec.
Yeah.
1948.
He had a lot to do with Cleveland winning. He brought in the right people. He brought in bringing McKechnie in as a coach, saved Boudreau's job. and brought a pennant to Cleveland. And it's just too bad. And McKechnie was pretty old at the time. He would have been one of the oldest managers, if not at the end of the game, if not the oldest. Like, well, except for Mac, of course. Mac was, nobody, close. But it was an interesting, really interesting time because the best teams didn't always win, and the best teams on paper anyway didn't always win. And the Red Sox definitely, in terms of manpower, I think they had the best team in the late 40s and had nothing to show for it.
Yeah, in fact, because I've done an awful lot of research on that season because my first year was following was at the end of 1951 when I was 8. I got into baseball through the cards. I started buying the cards. My parents had no interest.
No, my father took me to games when I was pretty young. So I was lucky in that respect.
Yeah, my parents took me to games. The first game in 1953, one game in 1954, one game in 1955, and in September of 1955, before school started, my friend and I, 12 years old, were traveling from Queens to the Bronx involving a bus and 2 trains to see a game. And this was during the day, of course. And 12 years old, we're riding the subways, taking trips like that by ourselves. Now,
I know.
Now it's impossible.
It is. It really is. It's amazing how times have changed. Yeah, it really is. And ticket prices. I had more tickets in the 40s. In the 40s, reserved seats for $1.25, and you're sitting behind, almost behind the team dugout, and it's incredible. It's different time, different era, definitely.
Yeah, that's why we keep our, you and I and the others keep our, hands in the past because the present is basically not worth writing home about.
Well, it's not as much fun to watch. That's for
no,
sure.
Not at all.
Yeah, there were players in the 40s and 50s like Eddie Stanky. They were always a pleasure to watch because they do unexpected things and things that became famous or infamous in their like Stanky kicking the ball out of Rizzuto's glove, and he was steal at second base that was a great moment. I was watching that World Series game and saw it and then didn't believe my eyes. I don't know what replay was like then, but it must have been good enough for it to be presented again in a play. And you could see him clearly do it.
And maybe it's in the highlight film. All those World Series highlight films are available on YouTube. I've watched a number of them in recent weeks.
Yeah, I haven't done that. But I know you should start doing it.
Yeah, the earliest one I found was 1945. That was weird.
Cubs and Tigers. Wow.
Yeah.
That would have been wow.
And a while back I watched the 1948, and there was one game that Bob Lemon started, and he pitched the complete game. I was shaking my head because they don't do that anymore.
Yeah, well, he only pitched it. He threw a no-hitter in 48.
Yeah.
And 48. If you were a regular staff member of a winning team, and you didn't have 15 complete games at least, and ideally 20, your position as to hold that position in the staff would have been up for grabs the following
Warren Spard once said, when I go out to start a game, I expect to finish it.
Yeah.
Well, he only had 382 complete games. I mean,
Yeah. Well, it was. Well, baseball is baseball. It'll always be baseball, and it'll be. There were still things about the game that I enjoyed. So.
Yeah. By the way, just for your information, Aaron Judge hit number 54 today.
Really? 54
Yeah.
and where are we? September 4th,
Yeah.
5th? Yeah. Oh boy. So there might be a. So what do you think if he tops Maris with 62? In your judgment, does he hold the record for the most home runs in a season? Done honestly.
Yeah.
You know, would you?
Yeah, it's just like Henry Aaron has the most home runs for a career.
Yeah, I would say that too, and there should be a watch on that starting pretty soon because as far as I'm concerned, the record still belongs to Maris.
If they ever put Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens in the Hall of Fame, it should be an asterisk. But whenever they do that, they do that 20 years from now. Not many people will be around who even saw it, and they'll look at these numbers and say, "Well, how can they not be in?" They forget.
Yeah. Well, some of us aren't going to forget. I hope, and I hope sports writers will always be reading about the past and realize that these guys didn't play the game honestly.
One last thing I wanted to bring up when we did the rookies thing on the last podcast. I thought we had overlooked a player that the Browns had in the 30s named Bo Bell. But I looked at his page, and he came up, play about half a season in 1935. and didn't do much. What happened with this guy? Do you have any idea? He had two great seasons, and then he couldn't do anything after that.
Yeah, well, look at Joe Bosnick. Joe Bosnick was hitting 340, 350, 360 every year, and then suddenly he's down 276, and he had one decent season after that. I don't know what happened to those guys. I have the 1933 Who's Who, which is a really fine book, a pictorial display of all the major league players at the time, and it really just extols their virtues. It doesn't say anything about the negative features of their careers. And I'm looking at, and the pictures are all they're all Caucasian. They're all fairly good looking or maybe good looking, and they didn't really talk about some of these guys. And, Bo Bell was a mystery. Now there's a guy named John Stone who really played as Jonathan Stone to mine because of the Who's Who, and he carried him as Jonathan Stone in those years. But apparently his name really was John. Maybe he was just called Jonathan. And he fell off the table very quickly. What happened to him is he had TB, and they discovered it, he ended up playing only half the season. And then
it's like that catcher on the Cardinals, Bill Delancey, I think had
exactly.
that.
Yeah, exactly. Delancey had a fantastic year, I think, in 35, and then, nothing after that. So there was still, Shane Deans had TB problems later to late.
1958, after 1958, he slumped badly from 57 to 58, and he missed almost the entire 59 season. And the Braves used 7 second basemen who were all terrible, and one of them was Bobby Avila, who went so downhill so quickly after 1954. It was incredible.
Yeah, it was incredible. Nobody in Cleveland could explain it, and I've never heard an explanation since. Because he won a batting title that retroactively many people consider Williams.
Yeah, because of
that year, and that was Cleveland's last batting championship. And I don't think anybody since has even come close to winning a batting title for Cleveland. At least I can't think of anyone. Laughlin and Bell had some good years, and they weren't hitting. There weren't 340, 350 averages. Well, Bell hit a really fine season. He hit 94. He had a really fine year. Cleveland really their last actual batting title winner by today's rules was Boudreau in 44. But,
they had Francona, but he didn't have the appearances.
He didn't have the things that changed by 59.
Yeah.
And I was it used to be 400 at bats, and he ended up with 399. And you wonder why didn't they give him another at bat? Well, it was really had come down to plate appearances by 59, and he didn't. They really didn't start playing him regularly until almost mid-season. Gordon just didn't believe. He didn't believe that Pearsall couldn't do the job in center field and hit enough to keep him in the lineup. But he couldn't, and they finally put Francona in center field, and he maintained that high average all year. It was a great season. Never matched it, of course. Anyway, we did.
Yeah. We're under 50 minutes. Okay, this was, as usual, terrific and a pleasure. I want to thank you for wanting to do this.
Yeah, I know. It was fun. I learned, I didn't really realize some of the things that you talked about.
No, I didn't realize, especially with the 6 umpires. I didn't realize.
Yeah, Nobody ever talks about that.
No.
I'm surprised somebody hasn't done an article on it. But
we feed off each other.
Yeah, we do, and maybe somebody will be driven by what they hear today.
Okay.
Look into it.
You give my best to Marilyn.
I will. Thanks, Hal.
Okay. Talk to you soon. Maybe we'll do another one in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely.
Whenever you're ready. Okay?
Okay. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices, and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.